What is up, fellow nerds, and welcome to Not Your Status Quo. Today, we will be doing our spoiler filled review of Wonder Woman 1984. And when I say spoiler filled, I mean there will be spoilers in the sense we are going to talk about things that happened in the movie. So if you haven't seen it, you might want to check it out before you watch this.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dave, and my wish is that you like and subscribe and do all the other fun YouTube stuff. Tell your friends, share it with your friends, or anyone who you think might like this content. I have another wish, and well, I'm going to save that for a little bit later.
Hey guys, I'm Doug, and I wish this movie was good, but it wasn't. On to the review.
Welcome to our review and breakdown of Wonder Woman 1984. Today, we have one thing that did work and 7 things that did not. And we will jump into the positive first. We'll talk about what did work in this movie, and that being the new No Man's Land scene. And what we're talking about with that is where she's with the convoy against Maxwell Lord when she first really finds out that he is now the Stone. It's kind of private army in the Middle East that he got. And she's doing all that she can to stop him. And she ends up at the end, firing on a rocket so she could save those kids from being run over, really showing the hero that she is. And we did stretch to find something that worked in this movie.
Yeah, Keith is not joking around about that. It was really a bit of a stretch to try and find the things that anything at all that we actually kind of liked about this movie. We'll get more into it a little bit later, but even that scene had its own little minor issues. We'd kind of be getting into nitpicking there, but I suppose that was possibly the only decent thing out of the out of the whole movie. Like, I hate to say it, but the fact that you had Wonder Woman swinging around saving kids, magically making her armor appear out of nowhere. Hey, powers and abilities, man. Superheroes are cool.
Yeah, the whole writing of this movie, it just seemed a lot like out of place to me. Even that scene, like Doug said, there's some nitpicky things. I just don't know, the kids out in the middle of the desert. I don't know what's going on there. Kind of weird, but it seemed like the action was, kind of shoehorned in this flick too, because it didn't seem natural. And when they were fighting, it just didn't seem very well choreographed. It seemed like a romantic comedy with a little bit of action to me. I don't know.
Well, Dave, for it to be a romantic comedy, there would have to be some chemistry between the co-stars and some comedy. I saw neither. But we will now get on to the things that we think didn't work about this film. And the first one being the overall plot. For me, it was filled with plot holes. It was filled with cliches. And the biggest thing is, as I'm watching this movie pan out, and I'm like, okay, they're doing the wishes and the negative thing to it. How are they going to make it their own? What are they going to do to make it Wonder Woman 1984 and the wish thing? And they did nothing. It was just like every other monkey's paws. Wishes have negative effects, things that I've ever seen. It really surprised me at how little they did to change this from every other story out there about wishes.
Yeah, why even call it 1984? I was really struggling with that because I was really hoping, based on the trailers that we got for this, on a lot of that, we had like some techno beats going on with like some synth music and everything, and you saw the fun little fish out of water scene with Steve Trevor. We'll get into that. But like, I really thought they were going to kind of lean a little bit heavily into the 1984 scene, but it didn't matter. It was completely inconsequential for this entire movie. It could have been in 1993. It could have been in 2002. The year didn't even matter for this movie. It made no difference. Honestly, you could have called it, Wonder Woman, Golden Eagle, Wonder Woman and the Wish Stone. It did not matter. You did not need to call it 1984. We were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, and Keith mentioned, Keith and Dave, they mentioned that they were probably playing on the whole Stranger Things fandom. I could see that. That might be the only reason. It didn't matter at all.
And another thing I didn't like about the plot is this movie did not have a villain. When the resolution is for everything to go back to normal and kind of just say this didn't really happen, except for one guy. He's gonna have no idea what happened. Yeah. But yeah, I didn't like that it had no villain.
And also, a thing that didn't work in this movie was the acting. You know, some actors did a better job than others. I do think Pedro Pascal did a good job as Maxwell Lord, kind of cheesy used car salesman, sort of manic, worrying about all the things that are falling apart and worried about being a loser. And then when he is, you know, the dream stone or wish stone, whatever you want to call it, his health sort of failing and, you know, his interactions with other people. But then you had like Gail Gadot, who, I don't know, she just kind of phoned this one into me. She just kind of was just sort of very monotone throughout this whole thing and didn't really have any highs or lows. And like we mentioned a little while ago, there was no chemistry at all with Chris Pine. You know, Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor in the first movie worked so well because they seemed to work as a couple, and it was, you know, you were engaged and you liked it. In this movie, it just seems like he's there as, you know, a stunt or, you know, part of the MacGuffin to draw everyone in. And it just didn't work at all for me.
Yeah, you are definitely right about that. The acting was off, for sure. I didn't really care for Pedro Pascal that much. Maybe I just saw it a little bit different. I suppose him flipping between used car salesman and manic and, you know, whatever, I suppose that could be deemed good acting. But to me, it was too much of a tone shift, like too rapid. And I can see that maybe, perhaps, I could be overthinking it. Perhaps they tried to make Maxwell Lord more of a deep villain. Maybe they were trying to make him more of your like MCU Thanos or Mr. Freeze from Batman the Animated Series. They were maybe attempting to make him more of a likable bad guy instead of just your mustache twirling villain. But I don't know. I didn't really see it. I agree with Keith that he didn't have very good motivations. They kind of had a quick flashback a little bit later on the movie that said he was poor and kids picked on him because he was poor. So he wanted to be a success now. Okay, that's cool, I guess. I don't know why you need to turn yourself into into a God-made wish stone, which by the way, that wishing stone, how did this unsuccessful failed oil baron businessman get so much knowledge on this very specific magic stone that turned out to be made by a god that a researcher with a doctorate at the Smithsonian couldn't even identify? How did this dude find out about this thing and figure out how it worked, that he had all of these illustrations and was tracking this thing down?
Yeah, and you know, we're talking about the acting here, and I had seen no performance that stood out to me to be good acting. I like Pedro Pascal. I think he's great as the Mandalorian. I think when you get an entire cast that falls flat, I think you got to drop that responsibility on the director. Sorry, but you have to. I mean, Kristen Wiig, she did become more intense, and I agreed with the guys. She got better when she was acting as the cheetah, but still not top line acting. So I think this one's gonna drop to Hattie Jenkins. Sorry to say it.
Next on our list of things that did not work in Wonder Woman 1984 is the 1980s aesthetic. Honestly, when they first announced it, I was like, okay, they're kind of doing a in the past again. This can work. They can do a lot of things. But really, they only used it for two things. And we kind of talked about this before, was the scene where Steve Trevor is trying on clothes and it was a bunch of 80s clothes gags, which wasn't funny, unfortunately. And then for the Cold War stuff, I mean, I don't know if they really thought that, hey, Stranger Things is really popular and it's set in the 80s. Let's do it in the 80s. But it really had no reason to be set in the 80s, as Doug had said earlier in this video. Absolutely no reason.
Yeah, okay, I'll talk a little bit more about this again. They could have leaned so heavily into the 80s aesthetic, but they didn't. They didn't take advantage of it. They called it Wonder Woman 1984. All of their previews, all of their trailers, all of their posters had this sort of 80s aesthetic, but the movie didn't. They could have totally went the Captain Marvel route, and they could have had, you know, the way that Captain Marvel leaned so heavily into the 90s with Blockbuster Video and payphones and the 90s clothes and the and all of the horrible music choices that they made and everything. They could have done that, and I would have accepted. I would have said, all right, cool, thanks for playing some decent 80s music. Thanks for showing a bunch of women walking around with shoulder pads and big hair. I would have been cool with that. You should have taken advantage of your time period, but you didn't do it, movie. Oh, there was a mall, I guess.
Next, Steve Trevor's return. The fact that he got put into another man's body when she wished for his return, where that wasn't consistent with all the other wishes. And the fact that he really came back for two things: a bunch of jokes about him being a fish out of water, which did not land in any way. And then also to remind Diana of the hero that she is. And he really didn't even do that. I mean, I know what they were trying to do. It just wasn't very well executed. And it just made me wish that Chris Pine had never signed on to come do this movie, because I think he's better than that. And I think everyone in this movie deserves better than this final product that we all saw.
I'm 100% with Keith. I thought that they just brought him back for fan service. There was no reason for him to be there. He didn't really do anything. He didn't help her do anything. I mean, he was with her when things happened, but he didn't really help the whole situation. So I didn't like it either.
You guys aren't joking. We could make a video all by itself about all the things that did not work with Steve Trevor in this movie. I barely even would count it as fan service. I'm not a fan. He served his purpose in the first movie. He died. Maybe he didn't need to be brought back. And if you were going to bring him back, not in this way. Like Keith said, he literally possessed a dude. Like, that's what the Wish Stone did, and it didn't need to do that. Like, okay, so it took Diana's powers away as its payment for this wish. But what did that dude do? Why did it take his entire life away for a week? Like, Dave mentioned this earlier on, like, this guy is going to have no memory, no recollection of what happened. The fact that his body was used to fight these these warlords and guards in Egypt, that he helped steal a plane from the Smithsonian. Did they return that plane, by the way? So many questions. Like, the FBI is going to be looking for him, right? Like, because he had to have committed crimes and probably fired from his job too. I mean, other than that, the fact that this badass Amazon warrior woman did not get over this Steve Trevor guy that she knew for a couple of days in 1918, I guess. She knew him for a short period of time, and in 66 years' time, she still hasn't gotten over him, and her entire movie had to be tied to him again. Like what Keith mentioned, this is sort of like barely a romantic comedy, I guess. The fact that she was so tied to this person again for yet another movie. Can't she exist in a movie without needing to be tied to another male? I mean, that's just my 2 cents on it.
And also, what didn't work for this movie was the Wonder Woman versus Cheetah fight at the end of this film. As I was watching this, I kept thinking, okay, the final battle is going to be worth it. It's going to have some redeeming qualities. And unfortunately, I was majorly disappointed, not only by the fact what Dave mentioned earlier about the end, where they just all said, oh, okay, we renounce our wishes, and everything went back to normal. There's no, nothing lasts in this. Everything's back to normal and everything's fine, except for the guy that Steve Trevor took over. Like Doug said, he's probably fired from his job and doesn't know what's going on, has no idea this all happened. But this whole fight just seemed kind of poorly choreographed. And the fact that it was done at night really took away from it. I mean, she had the Golden Eagle armor on because she was depowered, and Cheetah was just kind of ripping through it. But then she kind of came up depowered, but then she could take on Cheetah, who was this, apex predator. It just didn't make sense, and it just wasn't a good fight scene.
Keith, you perfectly described everything I was thinking. I don't even think I can add to that. It was just such a letdown to have the high climax moment of the movie just be like in the dark so you could barely see it. And I don't know. You're right on everything you said there.
Ooh, Cheetah. Wow. Yeah, a lot of that didn't work. The fight especially, but her entire character, even before she became the cheetah, it was to me, I got really major Batman and Robin vibes. Normally I would say, like, go back and watch some scenes, but that was a terrible movie and I wouldn't wish that on anybody. Uh-oh, don't let the wish stone take something from me. But yeah, so I'll just kind of like describe it if you want to go to YouTube and look it up, whatever. But in Batman and Robin, you've got Uma Thurman who plays Poison Ivy, but before she becomes Poison Ivy through I don't know, chemicals or radiation or something. Who knows? Corny comic book movie. But she was, of course, your nerdy researcher. She couldn't really, she was stumbling around. She wore glasses. So, that equals nerd, obviously. And she wasn't very confident, but then all of a sudden, she gets superpowers. She loses her glasses. Now she's got confidence. She's a sex symbol. She's, and she really just kind of takes control of her life. And I saw the same thing kind of happening with Dr. Minerva here, where we've got her, people don't even remember her. She's been working at the Smithsonian for quite a while, and people don't even know, her boss doesn't remember who she is. People don't pay her any attention. She can't walk in heels, but turning into the cheetah makes her able to walk in heels, I guess, was one of the powers that she gained. So cool, I guess. But yeah, the fact that they took one of the most iconic Wonder Woman villains and they did her this wrong in this movie. She needed a lot more buildup. She needed a lot more screen time. I mean, if you want to go with the Wishstone route for how she got her powers, okay, fine. But maybe don't have her rescind her wish at the end. So we'll talk a little bit more about that once we get to it, but she didn't have to do that. Or if maybe ignore the wish stone, if there was maybe some other sort of way that she could have gotten her powers like she did in the comics. There were so many other ways that Cheetah could have been done right, that her character could have been done right. Maybe she didn't even need to be in this movie. Maybe she could have been in another movie altogether and they could have actually given her the love that she deserves. I don't know. There could have been so many other things, but maybe we'll revisit that in an episode of Back to the Editing Room.
And finally, the CGI for Cheetah. You know, she just didn't look good at all in Wonder Woman 1984. And, a lot of the DC movies have had some CGI issues. Doomsday, Steppenwolf, the Enchantress's brother, are a few examples. And unfortunately, this trend continues in the sequel. I mean, she doesn't look terrible, but it's pretty clear that the dark surroundings of the fight are used to kind of disguise their disappointing visual effects. I mean, she looks a little too blurry, a little too furry, far too human. And honestly, it doesn't do the cheetah justice that it should do from the comic books, as Doug was just talking about. Her appearance is really a simple one, and it could have worked very nicely. But unfortunately, they decided to go this route, and unfortunately, it failed miserably.
I mean, you guys saw Cats, right? I can see why they flaked and, tried to hide her in the darkness and make her move too quick so you couldn't see it. They were probably freaking out thinking, oh my God, if we have, a weird fake cat person in our movie too, oh, that's going to make it bomb for sure. Let's just totally screw over one of Wonder Woman's most famous villains.
Yeah, it did look very cartoonish, like what you could see. And you could tell it was CGI. You could tell it was plastered on top of a background. It was poorly done. I hate to say that because I know it takes a lot of talent to do that, but it just didn't work. They got to go back to the drawing board. On to the reviews. I guess I'll start. Well, what else can you say? This movie did not live up to the hype. I think it maybe got overhyped because how long we had to wait from last summer. And then it came out on HBO Max, the first one ever released. So, it's got all this hype behind it. It just did not deliver. A lot more things that we can go into that didn't work, but we don't have time. We can do a whole other video, maybe a back to, the editing room, something like that. We will do that on this movie, but rating it, I'm going to rate it a 5 out of 10.
And I agree with Dave. There is something to be said about this movie. It was supposed to come out in November of like 2019. It got pushed back, and then the pandemic hit. So there's been a lot of buildup. And with how good the first one was, I think a lot of people just expected this to be equally as good. And unfortunately, by the time I sat down and I'm watching it, the plot was terrible. The acting wasn't great. They're throwing in the 80s aesthetic just for having the 80s in it. They bring Steve Trevor back. That didn't work. They huge letdown with, the villain that I think we were all looking forward to seeing in this movie and the CGI for that villain. I mean, it just all didn't work. And, the bottom line is, as I'm sitting there watching this movie, I just didn't enjoy it at all. And that's a terrible thing. And that's why I'm going to go a 4.5 out of 10. I really cannot recommend anyone watching this movie again. And I think the only way I will watch it again is if we do a back to the editing room, how we would fix it, just so I can remember the things that I need to fix.
Oh, they will not give me enough time in this video to express my ultimate displeasure with this movie. And I think a lot of it boiled down to the fact that I was really hyped for this. I really thought it was going to be so much better than it turned out to be. It was a waste of my time. It was difficult to sit through. I'm like Keith. I can't recommend this to anybody. If you want to go, if you're able to completely turn your brain off and you want to sit through this train wreck that is apparently a Wonder Woman movie, then by all means, I'm not going to stop you. But yeah, it wasn't good. I assume if you're watching this video, you've already seen it and you probably agree with most of the things that we've said. If you don't, you want to give us a dislike, that's cool too. I mean, I'm sorry, it was just not a good movie. They did so many things wrong. We talked about the plot and how all over the place and terrible it was, how it didn't even stick to the 1980s aesthetic, even though that was the actual title of the movie, Wonder Woman 1984, but they barely even used that. The fact that they, as Dave mentioned, they barely had any real villains because they didn't have clear motivations, really. And the fact that in the end, this entire movie was pointless. It was completely pointless because they hit the reset button as if this was a cheesy 80s TV show where somebody woke up from a dream and said, wow, that sure was a crazy adventure. Good thing none of it ever happened. I mean, yeah, 4.5 out of 10. I'm with Keith. I hated this movie. Good, go away.
But that's what we thought. Well, if you have any thoughts for us, please add them in the comments below. And we're very near 200 subscribers, and only you can make that happen for us. So until then, hopefully we'll see you on the subscriber list, and we'll see you next time on Not Your Status Quo.